The gun was already pressed against Ezekiel Underwood's temple when Catherine Holloway realized she had been the one who led him there. She stood in the center of Harlow Briggs's dimly lit saloon, the oil lamps casting a sickly amber glow across the faces of men who had gathered to watch what they expected to be an execution. Her heart had stopped beating in any normal sense. It had become something else entirely, a frantic, desperate hammering against her ribs that she could feel in her throat, behind her eyes, in the very tips of her fingers that were clutching the bar rail so hard her knuckles had gone white as bone. Harlow Briggs, the man who owned half of Dustcreek, Nevada, and the souls of every debtor unfortunate enough to have crossed his path, held the pistol with the casual ease of a man who had done this before. He smiled at Catherine across the room, and it was the most terrifying thing she had ever witnessed, because the smile was patient. "You should have delivered what you promised, Miss Holloway," Harlow said. "Instead, you brought me a man who has been working against everything I have built. Now I want to know which one of you is going to tell me where those land deeds are hidden. The one who stays quiet gets the bullet." Ezekiel's jaw was set. His gray eyes found Catherine's from across the room, and what she saw in them was not fear. It was something she had not expected, something that cracked open a place inside her chest she thought had been permanently sealed shut. It was forgiveness. He was looking at her with forgiveness before he was even dead. "Do not tell him anything," Ezekiel said, his voice absolutely level, as if a gun pressed to his skull was simply an inconvenience he was working around. "Not a word, Catherine." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. It had started 3 months earlier, on a Wednesday in late October of 1878, when Catherine Holloway had stepped off the stagecoach in Dustcreek with $42 to her name, a carpetbag that held everything she owned, and a letter of introduction to a man named Gerald Holloway, her father's younger brother, who had written to say he was willing to give her employment as a bookkeeper in his dry goods store. She had never been to Nevada before. She had grown up in Cincinnati, Ohio, where her father had worked as an accountant for a shipping firm until a series of bad investments, compounded by his death 3 years prior, had left Catherine with nothing but her education and her willingness to use it. She was 26 years old. She was practical, organized, unsentimental, and completely unprepared for the landscape that greeted her as she stepped off that stage. Dustcreek sat in a shallow basin between two ridgelines of sun-bleached rock, the kind of place that looked as if the earth had opened up just enough to allow a collection of buildings before changing its mind. The main street was unpaved and wide, lined with wooden storefronts, a post office, a livery stable, 2 saloons, a church without a steeple, and a hotel that advertised clean rooms in handwriting that suggested the sign had been painted by someone who had recently sustained a head injury. The dust was the first thing Catherine noticed, not the romantic, golden dust of dime novels. Real dust, the kind that settled into the corners of your eyes and coated the back of your throat and made the air taste faintly of chalk and dried horse. The second thing she noticed was the man standing outside the general store, loading a wagon. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with dark hair that needed cutting and the kind of face that had been made serious by weather and experience rather than by disposition. He wore a worn canvas coat, a battered hat, and work boots that had seen genuine labor. He was not watching her. He was focused entirely on what he was doing, stacking sacks of flour with methodical precision, and there was something about his absolute indifference to the arrival of the stagecoach that made Catherine look at him for slightly longer than was polite. She looked away and focused on finding her uncle. Gerald Holloway was a kind, nervous, soft-spoken man of 50 who wore his worry openly, like a garment. He greeted Catherine warmly enough, showed her to the small room at the back of the store he had prepared for her, and then, over supper that first evening, proceeded to explain the actual shape of her situation with the careful, apologetic manner of someone who has been rehearsing an unpleasant speech. The store was in trouble, not ordinary trouble. the kind of trouble that had a man's name attached to it. Harlow Briggs had arrived in Dustcreek 4 years ago with capital and ambition, and a talent for identifying other people's vulnerabilities. He had started by buying the larger of the two saloons, then the hotel, then a stake in the silver claim that produced most of the county's actual wealth. He had done all of this through loans made to men in difficult moments, loans with terms that were always slightly worse than they first appeared, and by 1878 he controlled enough of the town's commerce that refusing him was not simply difficult, it was dangerous. Gerald had borrowed from him 18 months ago, when a supply shipment had arrived badly damaged, and he had needed capital to restock. He had signed papers he had not fully understood, and now the debt had grown to a figure that bore no relationship to the original sum, and Harlow Briggs had made it clear he would accept the store as settlement. "He wants more than the store," Gerald told Catherine quietly, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup. "He wants all of the land on Ridgeline Road, the plots on either side of town. He has been buying them up one by one. The last ones he needs are owned by 3 families who have refused to sell. If he gets them, he controls every road into Dustcreek, every supply route, every piece of commerce flowing in or out." "What does that have to do with us?" Catherine asked. Gerald looked at the table. "He wants me to convince them to sell. He believes that as a respected member of the community, my endorsement might persuade them. In exchange, he will forgive my debt entirely. And if you refuse, he takes the store, and he has suggested, not in any way I could take to the sheriff, that my continued good health depends on my cooperation." Catherine sat with this for a long moment. Then she asked him who the 3 families were. One of them, Gerald told her, was the Underwood family. Ezekiel Underwood and his younger sister, Miriam. Their father had died the previous winter. The land had been in the family for 11 years. Ezekiel ran a small ranch on the western portion of the plot, and Miriam taught at the one-room schoolhouse on the eastern edge. That was the first time she heard his name. The next morning, Catherine began working in the store. She was good at bookkeeping, genuinely good, with a quick mind for numbers and a composure under pressure that she had developed over years of managing her father's accounts during the long decline of his business. She organized Gerald's ledgers in 3 days, identified 2 separate errors in his supplier's billing that recovered a small but meaningful sum, and began to understand with absolute clarity that even without Harlow Briggs, the store was operating on margins so thin that a bad winter could end it. She was working at the front counter on her 4th day when the bell above the door rang, and a man came in to purchase lamp oil, dried beans, and a length of rope. She looked up, and it was the man from the wagon. He placed his items on the counter with the same quiet efficiency he had shown before. He did not smile, but he was not unfriendly. He counted out exact change. "You must be Gerald's niece," he said, not a question. Small towns kept no secrets about arrivals. "Catherine Holloway," she said, and extended her hand in the businesslike way she had always preferred. He shook it. His grip was firm without being performative. "Ezekiel Underwood." "I have heard of you," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not alarm exactly, but a careful attentiveness. "From who?" "My uncle. He mentioned several families in the area." The attentiveness remained. He was evaluating her, not with suspicion precisely, but with the kind of measured assessment that suggested he had learned to be careful about what he took at face value. "How are you finding Dustcreek?" he asked. "Dusty," she said. He looked at her for a moment, and then, unexpectedly, a brief, genuine smile broke the serious line of his mouth. It transformed his face completely, and Catherine noted the transformation with the objective efficiency of a woman who noticed things. "Fair assessment," he said. He picked up his items and left. She watched him go. Over the following 2 weeks, she saw him 4 more times, once when he came in for axle grease and coffee. Once when she passed him on the street outside the post office, and they exchanged brief, polite greetings. Once at the church social on Sunday, where he sat in the back row and left immediately afterward, but paused at the door to ask her quietly if she had settled into the town well enough. And once, the most significant time, when she arrived at the store early and found him already there, in quiet conversation with her uncle in the back room. She did not interrupt, but she stood in the hallway long enough to understand that Gerald was already confessing the shape of his situation to Ezekiel, and that Ezekiel was listening with the stillness of a man who already knew most of it. She stepped back, went around through the side entrance, and waited at the front counter until she heard Ezekiel leave through the back. Then she went to her uncle and said, "Tell me everything, the real version." Gerald, visibly relieved to be released from the burden of partial truths, told her all of it. Harlow Briggs had been engaged in a systematic campaign to acquire the Ridgeline Road properties for nearly 2 years. He had already obtained 4 of the 7. 2 families had sold willingly, persuaded by prices that seemed fair, until you understood that Harlow always sold those properties back to himself through intermediaries at dramatically reduced figures that undermined the original owner's positions. The 3rd family, the Coopers, had sold after their well had been poisoned. No one had proven anything, but everyone in Dustcreek knew. The remaining 3 families, the Underwoods, the Vasquez family who operated a small cattle enterprise, and an elderly widow named Mrs. Prentice, had refused. Ezekiel Underwood, Gerald explained, had been quietly organizing resistance. He had connections with the Territorial Land Office in Carson City, and he had been building a documentation case, gathering evidence of Briggs's fraudulent loan terms, his price manipulation, the circumstances around the Cooper well. "Briggs knows about it," Gerald said. "Not all of it, but he suspects. That is why he is pushing so hard right now. He wants those deeds before Ezekiel can get his evidence to the right people." "Where does the evidence go?" Catherine asked. "There is a federal land commissioner arriving in Carson City in December. If Ezekiel can present before that commissioner, there is a genuine possibility that Briggs's entire scheme gets unraveled. The fraudulent loans get reviewed, the forced sales get investigated. When in December, the 15th, it was currently November 3rd, Catherine was quiet for a long moment. "And my role in this, what does Briggs actually want from you?" Gerald looked miserable. "He wants me to host a dinner, a community gathering at the store, a goodwill event, and he wants me to use it to get the 3 remaining property owners in the same room so that he can pressure them all at once. He believes that a coordinated push in front of the community will be more effective than individual approaches. He wants a trap," Catherine said flatly. "Yes, and you have not agreed. I have been stalling." "But he is losing patience." Catherine stood up, straightened her skirt, and said with a calm she felt down to her bones, "I need to speak with Ezekiel Underwood." Finding Ezekiel alone required some navigation. He was not a man who was easy to approach at a distance. He went about his work with a self-sufficiency that had the texture of long habit, as if he had learned over years that relying on other people was a variable he preferred to control. But he was not cold. Catherine had observed enough of him to understand that there was a significant difference between reserve and coldness, and Ezekiel Underwood was one of the most precisely reserved people she had ever encountered. She rode out to his ranch on a borrowed horse on a Thursday afternoon. It was a clear day, cold at the edges, with the kind of high Nevada sky that made everything feel simultaneously vast and intimate. The Underwood property was larger than she had imagined, a modest homestead with a main house, a barn, several outbuildings, and a good stretch of grazing land that had been carefully maintained. There were cattle, not many, but healthy. The fences were in good repair. Ezekiel was mending a section of fence near the eastern edge of the property when she arrived. He saw her coming from a distance and straightened up, watching her approach with that same measured attentiveness. She tied the horse, walked over, and said without preamble, "My uncle told me everything. I know about Briggs, I know about your documentation case, I know about the December deadline. I came to tell you that I will not be used as a tool against you." He looked at her for several seconds. The wind moved through the dry grass around them. A hawk circled somewhere in the distance. "Briggs approached your uncle," he said. "Yes." Gerald told him he would host the dinner. Gerald has been stalling. I intend to make sure he continues to stall until you have what you need. Ezekiel set down his fence tool. He turned fully toward her, and the expression on his face was one she could not immediately categorize. It was something between wariness and something softer that he was not quite ready to name. "Why?" he asked. It was such a direct question that it surprised her. She had expected caution, perhaps some deflection. She had not expected to be asked simply and plainly why she was choosing a side. "Because what Briggs is doing is wrong," she said. "And because my uncle is a good man who is frightened, and frightened good men make decisions that compromise them. And because I am here now and I have skills that might be useful." "What skills?" "Bookkeeping, records, numbers. I am very good at finding discrepancies in financial documents." Something shifted in his expression, cautious interest replacing pure wariness. "Briggs has been extremely careful about his paperwork." "Everyone leaves traces," Catherine said, "and I have 42 days before the land commissioner arrives in Carson City." There was a long pause. The hawk had disappeared into the blue. Behind them, one of Ezekiel's cattle made a low, companionable sound. "You are Gerald's niece," he said slowly. "Briggs will be watching you. Then I will need to be careful." "This is genuinely dangerous," Ezekiel said, and for the first time his voice carried something personal in it, something like concern that was not purely tactical. "The Cooper family's well did not poison itself. I am aware." He looked at her for another long moment. Then he bent down, picked up his fence tool, and said, "You had better come inside. I will make coffee." The inside of the Underwood homestead was clean, sparsely furnished, and organized with the same quiet efficiency Catherine had observed in everything Ezekiel did. A large wooden table dominated the main room, and it was covered in papers. Land maps, loan documents copied out by hand, correspondence, ledger entries. The shape of weeks of careful, methodical work. Catherine sat down at the table and began reading. Miriam Underwood arrived home from the schoolhouse an hour later, a young woman of 23 with her brother's dark hair and a far more expressive version of his face. She took in the sight of Catherine sitting at her kitchen table, surrounded by her brother's documents, with a cup of coffee at her elbow, and looked at Ezekiel with an expression that contained a great deal of information. "This is Catherine Holloway," Ezekiel said, "Gerald's niece. She is going to help." Miriam sat down across from Catherine, folded her hands, and said, "Tell me what you know about accounting fraud." Over the next 2 weeks, Catherine and Ezekiel developed a working partnership that had its own particular rhythm. She came to the ranch 3 times a week, always with a legitimate reason that would satisfy casual observation, buying supplies from town merchants that she then delivered, or collecting laundry from Miriam in an arrangement that gave her excellent cover. At the ranch, she went through Ezekiel's documents with methodical precision, and she began finding what she had expected to find. Harlow Briggs was sophisticated, but he was not perfect. There were inconsistencies in his loan interest calculations, differences between what borrowers had signed and what the ledger entries showed, small enough to be individually dismissible but systematic enough across multiple accounts to constitute a pattern. There was evidence suggesting that property valuations had been deliberately manipulated by someone in communication with the county assessor's office. And there were payments made through the hotel accounts to names that did not correspond to any legitimate vendors Catherine could identify. "These names," she told Ezekiel one afternoon, spreading 3 pages of ledger copies across the table. "I cannot find any business registration for any of them. They receive consistent monthly payments through the hotel account." Ezekiel leaned across the table to look, and for a moment his shoulder was close to hers, close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him. She kept her eyes on the documents. "Rosen," he read, "Whitfield and Cantor." He straightened up. "Cantor is the county assessor." Catherine looked up at him. "Are you certain?" "His full name is Theodore Cantor. He signs his correspondence T. Cantor." The silence between them was charged with the weight of what they had just found. This is the connection you needed, Catherine said. This is part of it, Ezekiel said. He was looking at the documents with an expression of focused intensity that she recognized by now, the look he got when something important was clicking into place. We need one more piece, the original loan terms. Gerald's original paperwork, the version Briggs actually filed with the county recorder versus the copy he gave Gerald. They will be different, Catherine said immediately. I need to prove it. The county recorder's office, Catherine said. That is in Abilene, 40 miles. 3 days' ride. They looked at each other. I can go, Catherine said. No, Ezekiel said, with a flatness that surprised her. I am perfectly capable of it. Is not a question of capability. The county recorder's office is open to property owners and their legal representatives. You are neither. I need to go myself or with someone who has standing. I could go as your legal representative, Catherine said, if you signed a letter of authorization. He looked at her. She looked back. Would it be legal, he asked. Letters of authorization to act as a personal agent in property matters have been recognized in Nevada territory since 1864. I looked it up at the post office library 3 days ago because I anticipated that this would eventually come up. Another one of those silences. She had learned to read them now. This one meant he was reassessing something. You have been planning ahead, he said. I'm a bookkeeper, she said. Planning ahead is my entire function. And there it was again, that brief, genuine smile that changed his whole face. It lasted slightly longer this time. I will write the letter, he said. On November 22nd, Catherine rode to Abilene with a letter of authorization signed by Ezekiel Underwood, a list of specific records to locate, and a story prepared about being an estate administrator for a property settlement. The county recorder's office was managed by a diligent, talkative man named Mr. Albright, who was exceedingly helpful to a well-spoken woman with organized paperwork. She found what they needed within the first hour. The original loan document filed by Harlow Briggs for Gerald Holloway's property showed an interest rate of 14%, compounding monthly. The copy Gerald had been given showed 8%, simple annual interest. The difference in what Gerald actually owed under the two versions was the difference between a manageable debt and an impossible one. Catherine copied everything carefully in her neat bookkeeper's hand, cross-referencing document numbers and filing dates. She was thorough. She was also observed. She did not know it yet. She arrived back in Dustcreek on the evening of November 24th, delivered the copies to Ezekiel, and sat with him and Miriam at the kitchen table while they went through everything. Miriam made supper, a proper meal, roasted chicken and bread and dried apple preserves, and Catherine ate at their table with the comfortable ease of someone who had been there many times, which she had. After Miriam went to bed, Ezekiel organized the documents into a careful order, and Catherine watched him work. She had been watching him for 3 weeks now. She knew the way he thought, the way he held a pen differently than he held a tool, how he ran a hand through his dark hair when he was frustrated, how he went very still when he was concentrating most intensely. She knew that he drank his coffee without sugar, and that he read by lamplight later than was probably good for his eyes, and that he had a particular expression, soft and private, that he used when he talked about the land his father had left them. She also knew that she had begun to look forward to these evenings with an intensity that had nothing to do with the work. She was in the middle of this realization when he looked up and caught her watching him. She did not look away quickly. She was not the kind of woman who looked away quickly. He held her gaze, and the quality of the silence between them was different from any previous silence. It was full of something that had been building for weeks, something careful and serious and mutual. "You are leaving," he said. "When this is finished, you will go back to Cincinnati or somewhere else." She had not expected that. "I have not thought that far ahead," she said honestly. "I find that hard to believe," he said. "You always think ahead." She looked at the table, at the documents between them, at the weeks of shared work spread out like a kind of map of everything that had passed between them. "I have been thinking," she said carefully, "primarily about what is immediately in front of me." "And what is that?" She raised her eyes to his. "I'm not sure I know how to answer that." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want to be honest with you. I am not a man who is comfortable with uncertainty. I have been running this ranch alone for 2 years, taking care of this case, taking care of Miriam, and I have become accustomed to keeping my own counsel about most things." "I noticed," she said. "And I find," he continued, with the slow deliberateness of someone choosing each word with great care, "that you are the most significant exception to that pattern I have encountered in a very long time." The lamp between them burned steadily. Outside, the wind moved across the Nevada plateau with its low, persistent sound. "Ezekiel," she said. "I am not asking you for anything," he said quickly. "I understand that this is complicated and that the timing is terrible, and that there is a great deal that still needs to—" "Ezekiel," she said again, and he stopped. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. It was a simple gesture. It was also, she knew in the moment she made it, the most declarative thing she had done in years. He turned his hand over under hers and held it. And they sat like that, with the lamp burning and the wind outside and the document spread between them, and it was the best and most terrifying thing Catherine had felt since she had arrived in Nevada. The danger arrived the following morning in the shape of a message. It was delivered to the general store before dawn, slipped under the door. A single sheet of paper in handwriting that was precise and cold. It said, "I know where you went. I know what you found. Return the copies by Friday or your uncle's store burns Friday night," and Gerald Holloway with it. There was no signature. There was none needed. Catherine read it twice, folded it, and put it in her pocket. She spent 40 minutes behind the counter helping the first customers of the morning. Then she told her uncle she was going to the post office, and instead she walked to the south end of town, sat down on a bench outside the livery stable, and allowed herself approximately 3 minutes of genuine fear. It was cold and immediate, and she sat with it fully, because she had learned that the only way through fear was through it. Then she got up, went to the livery stable, borrowed the horse again on the grounds that Gerald needed supplies from the Underwood ranch, and rode out. Ezekiel read the note standing up. His expression went through several things very quickly, all of them controlled, and then settled into a kind of careful, concentrated stillness that she recognized as him making decisions. "He had you followed in Abilene," he said. "That is the only explanation for how quickly he moved. Do you have the copies here?" "The ones you made?" "Yes. Are there any originals? Did you take anything from the recorder's office?" "I would never remove original documents from a government office," she said, slightly affronted. "I know," he said. He looked at the note again. "He thinks you took the originals. He thinks if he gets the copies back, his evidence trail is broken." "He is wrong," Catherine said. "The originals are still in the recorder's office. He cannot touch them without committing a federal crime in a government office, which is a different category of risk than everything he has done so far." Ezekiel looked at her. "We cannot give him the copies." "No," she said, "and we cannot give him time. Every day we delay now is a day he has to act first. The land commissioner is not until December 15th. Then we need to move the timeline." She was already thinking. "Is there a circuit judge?" "In Washoe County, yes, Judge Harlan Doss. He rides a circuit that includes Dustcreek on the 2nd and 4th Wednesdays." "When is the next Wednesday?" "December 3rd. 8 days." She looked at the documents. 8 days is enough if we move now." "A circuit court is not a federal land commission," Ezekiel said. "The jurisdiction for the land fraud." "The jurisdiction for fraud and forgery is criminal," Catherine said. "A circuit judge can issue a criminal indictment and an emergency injunction preventing property transfers while the matter is under federal review. That stops Briggs cold without needing to wait for the commission." Ezekiel stared at her. "You learned that at the post office library too?" "I have been at the post office library a great deal." He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she had come to associate with him recalibrating his thinking. "It could work," he said slowly. "If we go to Doss with the documentation, the fraudulent loan terms, the assessor payments, the pattern of property acquisitions, and the note," Catherine said. This note is itself evidence. It connects Briggs to an explicit threat against a specific person on a specific date. That is criminal intimidation. He looked at her for a long moment with an expression that was equal parts something she could only describe as admiration and something more personal, warmer, more complicated. "You are extraordinary," he said. It came out simply, without ornament, as a plain statement of fact. Catherine felt the warmth of it move through her in a way she chose not to analyze in the moment. "I am a bookkeeper," she said again, but she could not entirely keep the softness out of her voice. They spent the rest of the day organizing the full documentation package for Judge Doss. Miriam came home from school and helped, making clean copies of key documents in her own precise teacher's handwriting. Ezekiel drafted a formal statement of claim. Catherine wrote a summary memo that laid out the timeline of events and their evidentiary significance in clear, numbered paragraphs. It was late when they finished. Catherine stayed for supper again, and afterward, when Miriam had excused herself to prepare lessons, she and Ezekiel sat by the fire in the main room with cups of coffee and the easy, quiet companionship of people who had done serious work together and arrived somewhere meaningful. "Tell me about Cincinnati," he said. It was the first time he had asked her anything personal. She looked at him a little surprised. "What do you want to know? What your life was like before this?" She thought about it honestly. "Careful," she said. "Very careful. I spent most of my adult life managing my father's accounts, keeping things organized while things fell apart around them. My mother died when I was 12. It was just him and me. He was a good man but a poor businessman, which is a particularly difficult combination because the goodness prevents him from making the hard choices the business requires." She paused. "He died 3 years ago. After that it was just me, and a very small amount of money, and a skill set that had limited application in a city where women are not especially welcomed in commercial roles." "Why did you come west?" he asked. It was a real question, not polite conversation. "Because the West does not care as much about what is proper," she said. "It cares about what works. Gerald needed a bookkeeper and I could be one. That is all." "That is not all," he said quietly. She looked at the fire. "No," she admitted. "I suppose I wanted something I did not know how to name. I was tired of being careful all the time in a place that gave me very little for the carefulness." "And now," she met his eyes. The firelight moved across his face, and she thought with a sudden, clear ache that she had not anticipated caring this much about any specific person's face. "Now," she said, "I am in the middle of something that could genuinely matter, and I am sitting in a room with a man who treats me as his equal, which I find, after 26 years, to be a profoundly moving experience." He reached over and tucked a strand of hair back from her face, very gently, with a touch that was both tentative and deliberate. "You are more than my equal," he said. "I want to be honest about that." She leaned into his hand just slightly, just enough. "Do not say things like that when we have 8 days until a circuit court hearing," she said, but she was smiling. "I will say them after," he said. "I will hold you to it," she said. The next 4 days were busy in the way of a clock wound too tight. Catherine managed the dual performance of her daily work at the general store, maintaining the appearance of normal operations while keeping her uncle calm and stalling Harlow Briggs through a series of carefully orchestrated delays. She sent a message to Briggs through Gerald, saying that the copies had been retrieved from their hiding place, but that she needed 3 more days to ensure they were complete and properly handed over, citing a bookkeeper's instinct for thoroughness, which was both plausible and completely false. Briggs sent back a message accepting the delay. It concerned her more than a refusal would have. On the morning of November 29th, a man she did not know began appearing near the general store at irregular intervals. He had the look of someone trying not to have a look, the studied casualness of surveillance, and Catherine noted him 3 times before she was certain she was being watched. She said nothing about it at the store. That afternoon, when she rode out to the ranch with the apparent purpose of returning a borrowed cooking pot, she told Ezekiel about the watcher. He knew him. "His name is Garrett Voss. He works for Briggs." Then Briggs has stopped trusting the delay, she said. He was always going to stop trusting it, Ezekiel said. What concerns me more is that if Voss is watching you, he may have already gone to the ranch while I was in town this morning. They both looked at each other. The documents, Catherine said. They went directly to the barn, where Ezekiel had hidden the original document package in a sealed tin box behind a false panel in the feed room. The panel had been disturbed. The box was still there, but the position of the tin had changed by perhaps 2 inches, the kind of change that a man in a hurry makes when he replaces something he did not expect to have to replace. Ezekiel opened the box. Everything was still there. He looked but did not take anything, he said. Because he was looking to confirm what was there, not to remove it, Catherine said. If he had taken the documents, we would know they were gone. He wanted to know whether we had the full case. Now Briggs knows we do. The temperature between them dropped by several degrees of urgency. We cannot wait until December 3rd, Catherine said. Judge Doss rides his circuit. He will be in Abilene until Wednesday, then we go to Abilene. He looked at her. That is 2 days' ride. If we leave tomorrow morning, we arrive Tuesday evening. Doss hears us Wednesday. We have the injunction and the criminal referral by Wednesday evening. Everything Briggs can do after that is subject to court oversight. Voss is watching you. If you disappear tomorrow morning, Briggs moves. Then we give him something to watch, Catherine said. I stay visible in town tomorrow. You leave before dawn. I follow at noon, separately. Ezekiel did not like it. She could see the not liking of it in every line of his face. If something goes wrong while you are alone on that road, if something goes wrong while I am sitting in the store doing nothing, your father's land and Gerald's store, and the Cooper family's poisoned well, and everything else Briggs has done goes unpunished, she said. I am willing to accept a manageable risk for that outcome. Are you? His jaw worked. I am not comfortable with you taking any risk. I know, she said, but that is not actually your decision. A long silence. No, he said, it is not. He looked at her, and there was something fierce and honest in his expression that had nothing to do with tactics. I am asking you to be careful, not as a business partner, as someone who finds that your continued existence matters to him considerably. Catherine felt the weight of that settle into her chest. I will be careful, she said, quietly and sincerely. He nodded once, tight and controlled. They executed the plan. Catherine spent the next morning at the store, visible, accounting for herself in the sight of Garrett Voss, who maintained his post across the street. She chatted with customers. She helped an elderly rancher's wife select fabric. She was a model of normalcy. At noon, she told Gerald she was taking the horse for a supply run and would be back by supper. She went to the livery, took the horse, rode east out of town in full view of Voss, then looped south and west through a dry creek bed she had ridden 3 weeks earlier and knew the layout of well enough to navigate quickly, and came up on the Abilene Road from the south rather than the north. She pushed the horse harder than she was comfortable with, not recklessly but seriously, and covered the distance to the first way station by late afternoon. She stopped to rest the animal, ate the food she had brought, and continued at a walk until dark, then made camp where the road bent through a stand of juniper trees that provided cover. She slept badly and was moving again before first light. She arrived in Abilene late Tuesday evening, dust-covered and genuinely tired, and found Ezekiel at the hotel, which was a relief so sharp it startled her. He saw her come in, and the controlled expression he wore fractured briefly into something unambiguous and unguarded. "You made it," he said. "I said I would be careful," she said. He crossed the room and took her hands, and she held on. They presented to Judge Harlan Doss on Wednesday morning. He was a broad, skeptical, silver-haired man who had been hearing cases on the Nevada circuit for 11 years, and had the look of someone who had seen every variety of human greed and was not easily impressed by new examples. But he was meticulous, and he read everything they put before him with genuine attention, and he asked questions, good ones, the kind that showed he was following the logic of the evidence. It took 3 hours. At the end, he removed his glasses, looked at both of them and said, "I am issuing an emergency injunction preventing the transfer or encumbrance of any property on Ridgeline Road pending a full hearing. I'm also issuing a criminal referral to the federal prosecutor's office in Carson City regarding the fraud allegations and the assessor bribery. And I am issuing a summons to appear for Harlow Briggs personally for criminal intimidation in connection with this note." He held up Catherine's folded note. "This is a serious document, Miss Holloway. He is a serious threat," she said. "I have encountered Mr. Briggs's paperwork before in a different context," Das said. "I had no reason to connect it to anything at the time. I have reason now." He signed the documents. He handed them the certified copies. He recommended they travel with a deputy marshal for the return to Dustcreek, and he had one available. They rode back to Dustcreek on Thursday with a deputy marshal named Sayers, a quiet, efficient man from California who treated the whole enterprise as routine administrative procedure. The tone of his casual competence was deeply reassuring. They arrived in Dustcreek on Friday afternoon, which was, Catherine realized with a cold start, the day Briggs's note had designated as the deadline. She saw it as they rode in. Garrett Voss was standing outside the saloon with 3 other men, and all of them were watching the road. When they saw the group riding in, when they clocked the deputy marshal's badge, there was a moment of communication between them that required no words. Voss went into the saloon. "He is telling Briggs," Ezekiel said beside her. "Yes," Deputy Marshal Sayers said calmly. "Good. Saves me the trouble of finding him." What happened next moved with the speed and pressure of a cresting flood. Sayers served the summons. Briggs refused it initially, then reconsidered when the legal language was read aloud in the saloon in front of witnesses. The injunction was posted. Gerald Holloway was notified that his loan had been placed under court review and that no collection or property action could proceed during the pendency of the proceeding. The Vasquez family was notified. Miriam Underwood appeared within 40 minutes, having apparently been watching the road for them. And then, 3 hours after their arrival, as the daylight was going thin and gold across the rooftops of Dustcreek, Harlow Briggs looked at everything arrayed against him, at the court documents and the marshal's badge and the organized case that had been built over 7 weeks in front of his eyes by a woman he had dramatically underestimated, and he made a calculation. He sent for Catherine. He sent the message through a saloon girl, a young woman named Dolers who had the air of someone accustomed to carrying messages she did not want to carry. The message said he wanted to discuss a resolution, a private meeting, just the 2 of them. She read it and knew immediately what it was. It was a trap. He did not want a resolution. He wanted the documents, or her, or both, or simply the satisfaction of demonstrating that he still had power. She should have refused. She understood that she should have refused, but she also understood that Harlow Briggs, with his back against a wall, was most dangerous to the people around her. To Gerald, who was still vulnerable in a dozen ways, to Miriam, to Ezekiel, who had been the visible public face of resistance and was the most obvious target for a man who knew he was losing. She sent back a message saying she would come at 8 o'clock. She did not tell Ezekiel. She told herself it was because she needed him to be somewhere else, safely elsewhere, while she managed whatever this was. She told herself it was tactical. She was honest enough with herself to know that it was also something more complicated, something she did not entirely know how to examine cleanly. She went to the saloon at 8. Harlow Briggs was not sitting at a table in the main room as his message had implied. He was in the back office, and he had 3 men with him, and Garrett Voss was holding a pistol. And on the far side of the room, already there ahead of her because someone had told Briggs where he would be, was Ezekiel Underwood. This was the moment she had been standing in when the story first found her. This was the room with the amber lamps and the watching faces. This was Harlow Briggs's patient, terrifying smile. This was Ezekiel looking at her across a room, with a gun to his head and forgiveness in his eyes. And this was Catherine Holloway understanding, with the total clarity of a moment that strips everything else away, that she was in love with him. Not in a gentle, gradual, well-organized way. In the kind of way that made 42 days of shared work and careful conversation feel like a whole life, and the prospect of losing him feel like losing the thing that had finally made Cincinnati, and carefulness, and the whole long diminishment of her previous life irrelevant. "Miss Holloway," Briggs said, "I am glad you joined us. Mr. Underwood here has been reluctant to tell me where your document package has been filed." "It has been filed with the Circuit Court in Abilene," she said. "The original records are in the county recorder's office. The criminal referral is on its way to Carson City. You cannot stop any of it. I can make the next 3 weeks significantly unpleasant for certain people," he said pleasantly. "Or you can both give me what I need to challenge those filings, and we can reach an arrangement that does not end badly for anyone." "There is no arrangement," Catherine said. "The documents are public record now. You cannot unsee what a federal prosecutor has already seen." Briggs tilted his head. "You are very confident for a woman standing in a room with 3 guns." "I am a bookkeeper," she said. "I deal in facts." From outside a sound, not loud. Just the firm, specific sound of a door. Then footsteps. Then Deputy Marshal Sayers's voice carrying through the wall with the calm, carrying authority of official business. "Federal office. Everyone inside, I need you to remain exactly where you are." Briggs's face changed. He had been expecting to have more time. He looked at Garrett Voss. He looked at the gun. He looked at the wall through which Sayers's voice had come. Ezekiel moved, not rashly. He did it with the controlled economy of a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment, turning his body to create distance from the pistol, using his elbow, and the gun discharged into the ceiling, and Garrett Voss was on the floor. The door came open. Sayers came in, followed by 2 men Catherine recognized as members of the Dustcreek community who had apparently been deputized in the last several hours, which meant Sayers had anticipated something like this and had not been operating in ignorance at all. Briggs looked at all of it and sat down slowly. It took another hour to sort out. Briggs was taken into custody. Voss was arrested. The other 2 men surrendered without incident. Sayers produced documentation suggesting he had been in communication with the federal prosecutor's office all day, that the criminal referral from Judge Doss had reached Carson City faster than either Catherine or Ezekiel had known, and that a federal agent had been traveling toward Dustcreek since Thursday. Outside the saloon, in the cold dark of the Dustcreek street, Catherine stood with her hands clasped together, breathing carefully, doing the thing she had done in the livery stable 3 days ago, which was allowing the fear to move through her entirely rather than pushing it away. Ezekiel came and stood beside her. He did not say anything for a long moment. Neither did she. "You went without telling me," he said. "Yes, because you were trying to protect me." She did not deny it. "I would ask you not to do that again," he said. "Not because I need protecting, but because we are better together than we are separately, and you know that as well as I do." "I know it," she said. "I made a decision I should not have made alone." "Yes." Silence. "Are you angry?" she asked. "No," he said, and then, after a moment, "I was frightened for you. That is not anger." She turned to look at him. His face in the dark street, in the faint lamp light from the saloon windows, was open in a way she had rarely seen it. "I realized something in there," she said. "Tell me." "I realized that I do not want to leave Dustcreek." The quiet stretched between them, but it was the comfortable kind, the kind she had come to associate with him. "That is good," he said, "because I have been trying to think of a way to ask you to stay for the last 3 weeks, and I have not been able to find the right arrangement of words." "I do not need an elaborate arrangement," she said. "I need the truth." "The truth," he said, "is that you walked into my life 6 weeks ago and turned every assumption I had about working alone and keeping my own counsel completely upside down. The truth is that everything I do, I find myself calculating whether it is something you would want to know about, and your opinion matters to me in a way that I have no previous reference for. The truth is that I have been holding onto this whole enterprise, this ranch, this land, my father's memory, with both hands for 2 years without asking for anything from anyone, and you are the first person I have ever encountered that I genuinely want to ask." She stepped forward and put both her hands against his chest and looked up at him. "Then ask," she said. He put his hands over hers. "Stay," he said, "please, not just in Dustcreek, stay with me." She stood on her toes and kissed him, right there in the cold street outside Harlow Briggs's now vacant saloon, in the middle of the Wild West that did not care about propriety. And he kissed her back with all the warmth and seriousness and deliberateness that she had come to understand was simply the way Ezekiel Underwood did everything he meant. The hearing before the Federal Land Commissioner on December 15th was thorough and conclusive. The evidence that Catherine and Ezekiel had assembled, the fraudulent loan terms, the assessor bribery payments, the systematic property manipulation, was presented in full. The commissioner, a meticulous Bostonian named Thomas Farwell, who wore his disapproval of Western land fraud like a second coat, reviewed everything and issued findings that were comprehensive and devastating to Harlow Briggs's interests. The fraudulent loans were voided. The forced sales of 2 properties were ruled void, and the original owners, or their estates, received compensation from Briggs's sequestered accounts. Theodore Cantor, the county assessor, resigned and faced separate criminal proceedings. Garrett Voss was sentenced to 2 years in the Nevada State Prison. Harlow Briggs himself faced a federal trial in January of the following year. He was convicted on 7 counts of fraud, 2 of criminal intimidation, and 1 of conspiracy to commit bribery. He was sentenced to 12 years. The Underwood land was safe. The Vasquez family's property was safe. Mrs. Prentice was notified that the assessment irregularities affecting her land were being corrected, and her property taxes for the previous 2 years would be refunded. Gerald Holloway's debt was voided. When he heard the news, he sat down in the middle of the store and cried quietly for about 3 minutes, and then he stood up and went back to work, which was the most Gerald thing Catherine had ever witnessed. On Christmas Day, 1878, Ezekiel Underwood asked Catherine Holloway to marry him. He did it without fanfare, in the kitchen of the homestead, while she was helping him prepare a meal for the 3 of them and Miriam, who had invited 2 of her schoolchildren whose families were spending the holiday with distant relatives. He came and stood beside her at the kitchen counter and said, "I have a question I have been meaning to ask since November." And she turned and saw the small ring, a simple silver band with a turquoise stone that had belonged to his mother. She said yes before he had finished formulating the question, which made Miriam, who was watching from the doorway with a look of profound satisfaction, laugh out loud. They were married in January, in the little church without a steeple, which Ezekiel and several men from the community had agreed to finally provide a steeple for as a community improvement project. The steeple was not quite finished for the wedding, but the frame was up, which Catherine said was close enough. The minister, a cheerful man named Reverend Coates, who had been waiting years for a proper congregation to develop, officiated with audible enthusiasm. Miriam stood beside Catherine. The Vasquez family attended in their entirety. Gerald wept again, openly and without embarrassment. Deputy Marshal Sayers, who had remained in Dustcreek for the duration of the federal proceedings, attended in his official capacity and brought the best wedding gift, which was written confirmation from the federal prosecutor's office that all remaining legal matters were fully resolved, and no further action against any Dustcreek resident was pending. Catherine wore a dress she had made herself from fabric in Gerald's store, a deep blue wool that she had selected because it was warm and practical, and because Ezekiel, when she had shown him the fabric weeks earlier while pretending she was advising a customer, had gone very slightly still in the way he did when something struck him, and then said it was a beautiful color. Life on the Underwood ranch settled into a shape that surprised Catherine with how naturally she fit it. She had imagined she might miss the ordering and accounting of a city life, the particular rhythms of commercial work. She did not miss them. She found that the ranch had its own deep and engaging organizational logic, that there were accounts to keep, supplies to manage, planning to do for the seasons, and that all of it benefited enormously from a mind like hers applied to it systematically. She was not simply domestic. That was something she was clear about from the beginning, and Ezekiel never suggested otherwise. She continued to manage Gerald's store accounts on a part-time basis, a formal arrangement that paid her a proper fee, and she began doing the same for the Vasquez family, who had discovered that their accounts were also in need of professional attention. By March, she had 3 paying clients and a 4th inquiry from a mining concern whose operation ran near Dustcreek. "You are building a bookkeeping business," Ezekiel observed one evening, watching her organize her ledgers at the kitchen table. "I am building a practice," she corrected, "which is the same thing but sounds less like I am competing with the post office." "Dustcreek does not have an accounting firm," he said. "Dustcreek did not have a church steeple either until recently," she said. He smiled. The full version, the one she had decided that first week she wanted to see as often as possible. She was also learning the ranch. Not performing a role in it, actually learning it, the way she learned everything, systematically and with genuine curiosity. Ezekiel taught her to ride properly, not just functionally but well, with the kind of knowledge of the animal that made a real difference across Nevada terrain. She learned the cattle, their patterns and needs, and the specific considerations of the particular grazing land the Underwoods had chosen. She learned the rhythms of the range year, what the summer would bring, what preparations were needed in autumn, what the signs of weather were in the particular sky above the basin. She asked questions constantly. It was one of the things about her that Ezekiel found, as he told her on more than one occasion, genuinely delightful, that she was interested in everything and not remotely embarrassed about not knowing it. Spring came to Nevada with a sudden force that seemed like an argument the land had been saving up all winter. The range grass came up vivid and fast. The sky developed a depth that made the winter sky feel like a sketch compared to the real thing. The Underwood cattle expanded their grazing range, and there were calves, the first of the spring, arriving with the businesslike efficiency of livestock that has learned not to be dramatic about existence. Catherine was watching the second calf of the season arrive, crouched in the field beside Ezekiel in the early morning when she told him. She had known for 3 weeks. She had been managing the knowledge quietly in her organized way, making sure of herself before saying anything. "I am going to have a child," she said, quietly to the side of his face, while they both watched the calf find its legs. He turned and looked at her, and the expression on his face was one she had never seen before. Not the controlled attentiveness, not even the rare open warmth she had come to know. Something entirely new, something enormous and unguarded and bright. "Catherine," he said. She smiled. She had been saving the smile up since she had been certain. He reached over and took both her hands and held them between both of his, and for a moment he did not say anything else, just held her hands while the calf stood up in the morning field. "A boy," he said, "will need a better name than Ezekiel." "What is wrong with Ezekiel?" she said, laughing. "Nothing is wrong with it when there is only one of us." "We will find something," she said. Miriam, when told that evening, cried and then immediately began planning improvements to the homestead that were completely premature and absolutely necessary, according to her, because proper preparation required at least 6 months of lead time. She was going to add a room. She had already decided. Ezekiel looked at Catherine over Miriam's head, and they shared the kind of smile that passes between people who have become, through work and honesty and the particular alchemy of time, genuinely fluent in each other. Gerald, when Catherine told him the following week, added another 3 minutes of quiet tears to his collection. "Your father would have been very pleased," he said when he was composed. "You know that." "I know that," she said. The summer of 1879 was full and warm, and demanding in the way that Catherine had come to deeply love about ranch life, the way everything required you, and none of it waited for a convenient moment. She worked through the pregnancy with the same practical efficiency that she applied to everything, adjusting what needed adjusting, refusing to treat her condition as an incapacity when it was not one. She argued with Ezekiel about this mildly and regularly throughout July and August, and he won some of the arguments and she won the rest, which was roughly the proportion she had decided was appropriate for a sound marriage. The room Miriam had insisted on building was finished by September, paneled in good pine with a south-facing window. It was the warmest room in the house. Catherine lined it with a patchwork quilt she had been working on since April and declared it ready. Their son was born on the 12th of October, 1879, 1 year and 8 days after Catherine Holloway had stepped off the stagecoach in Dustcreek with $42 and a carpetbag. He was large and healthy and extremely opinionated from the first moments of his life about the general arrangement of things, which Miriam said was entirely predictable given his parents. They named him Thomas after Catherine's father, with Gerald as his middle name, which caused Gerald Holloway to conduct the longest of his crying sessions to date, and which Catherine had planned for specifically because she thought it would do him good. Thomas Underwood had his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes, and a disposition that was, from the beginning, intensely curious about everything. He regarded the world from his earliest days with an expression of focused assessment that Ezekiel said he found very familiar, and Catherine said she found very reassuring. The practice Catherine had built continued to grow. By the time Thomas was old enough to sit on her lap and bat at her ledger pages with small, determined hands, she had 7 regular clients across the county and a reputation as the most reliable accounting service in the region. She had trained a young woman named Addie Marsh, a schoolteacher's daughter with a head for numbers, as an assistant. The accounting service occupied a small office in the Holloway General Store, a proper office with a door and a window, and a sign that read Underwood Accounting, which had caused Ezekiel to stop in the street outside it on the day it went up and look at it for a long moment with an expression Catherine recognized as the one he wore when something moved him. "Underwood Accounting," he said. "You objected to the name," she said. "I very much did not object," he said. The Underwood Ranch expanded in 1880, when Ezekiel purchased an adjacent property from a family moving back east after 3 years that had been harder than they expected. The expansion doubled the grazing land and required 3 additional ranch hands, a development that gave the property a new kind of organized activity, a community within itself, that Catherine found she loved. She became the natural center of it, not because she sought the role, but because she was genuinely interested in everyone and good at the practical management of multiple overlapping needs. The ranch hands, a mix of men from various parts of the country and one Paiute man named James who had grown up in the region and knew the terrain better than anyone, were treated by Catherine with the same respect she extended to everyone who worked honestly, and they returned it in the particular way of people who are not accustomed to being treated well. James became an important figure in the ranch's operation over subsequent years, his knowledge of the land invaluable, and his family, who came to work on the property in later years, became part of the extended community the Underwoods built. Catherine was careful about those relationships, careful in the way of someone who understood that the West was built on land that had belonged to people before the settlers arrived, and that honoring that complexity honestly was both right and practically necessary. Miriam married in 1881, a mathematics teacher named Robert Caldwell who had arrived to replace her at the school when she was briefly ill and had stayed considerably longer than the illness required. He was steady, warm, and intelligent, and Miriam looked at him with the transparent happiness of someone who has found the exact right thing. They built a house on the eastern portion of the Underwood land, which Ezekiel had always intended as Miriam's portion, and the 2 households became something Catherine privately described as a very small village with excellent accounting. Thomas, at 2, was deeply convinced that his aunt's new house existed primarily for his benefit, and was frequently found in Miriam's kitchen, investigating her flour barrel. At 3, he developed an intense relationship with the ranch's oldest horse, a gray gelding named Absalom, who was patient, enormous, and apparently willing to accept Thomas as an authority figure. At 4, Thomas could name every cow on the property by sight, a feat that delighted everyone and confirmed what Catherine had suspected since his earliest months, that he was going to be someone who paid attention. The winter of 1882 was the hardest Nevada had seen in a decade. The snow came early and heavy, and the ranch operation became an exercise in prepared endurance. Catherine's second pregnancy coincided with the worst of it, which meant that the period of greatest physical difficulty for her overlapped with the period of greatest operational difficulty for the property, and she made her peace with this in the particular way she made peace with everything, by organizing it as effectively as possible, and then trusting the people around her. Ezekiel was steady through all of it in the way that she had come to understand was the deepest expression of who he was. He was not effusive. He was not a man who narrated his feelings in long speeches. But he was present with a consistency and an attention that was more sustaining than anything effusive could have been. He noticed what she needed before she said it. He sat with her through the long, cold evenings without requiring her to be anything other than what she was. He told her the truth. He asked her opinion. He listened to the answers. Their second child arrived in February of 1883, on a morning when the snow was so bright outside the window that it filled the room with a cold, white light. She was a daughter, small and fierce and immediately specific about her opinions, and they named her Frances, which had been Ezekiel's mother's name. Frances Underwood had her mother's calm watchfulness combined with her father's stubbornness, which meant she was, from the beginning, a person with a complete internal logic that could not be argued with and only occasionally needed to be redirected. Thomas, at 3, was cautiously interested in his sister and spent approximately 1 week establishing his assessment before deciding she was acceptable, and thereafter appointed himself her primary guardian, a role he pursued with the methodical dedication he brought to everything. Gerald Holloway's health began to decline in 1883, gradually at first and then with more insistence. His heart, the doctor in Abilene said, required rest and less exertion. Catherine managed his store accounts and increasingly the store itself, working with Gerald from a comfortable chair he had installed near the counter so that he could supervise without standing. He remained there most days through the spring, cheerful and interested and increasingly content with a life that had, in the last 5 years, turned out far better than it had ever threatened to. He died in June of 1883, quietly, in his sleep, in the room at the back of the store he had prepared for Catherine 5 years earlier. She was holding his hand, having arrived that morning with a feeling she trusted, the precise, organized instinct of a woman who paid attention to what was real. She sat with him for a long time after. She left him Gerald's store. He had arranged it in writing properly in a legal document filed with the county recorder's office, leaving everything to Catherine. She kept the store going, formally now as part of the Underwood enterprise, managed by a young man named Walt Barrows who had worked there since he was 16 and knew every supplier and every customer and loved the work. She stood at Gerald's grave on a clear June afternoon, with Ezekiel beside her and Thomas holding her hand and Frances on Ezekiel's hip, and she said a quiet, honest thank you to her uncle for the letter he had written to a niece in Cincinnati with $42 and a carpetbag. By 1885, Dustcreek had changed considerably. The post-Briggs years had allowed the town to develop on its own terms, without the stranglehold of controlled commerce routes. New businesses had arrived. The church had its steeple properly completed. There was a proper school building to replace the one-room version, funded in part by a donation from the Underwood family, and in part by the returned property tax overpayments from the Land Commission findings that had been accumulating in an escrow account since 1878. Catherine was elected to the newly formed Dustcreek Civic Council, the first woman to hold any such position in the county. She accepted the role with the same brisk pragmatism she brought to everything, and she was an effective and productive council member, particularly on matters of financial management and public infrastructure, where her professional experience was directly applicable. Ezekiel, when she told him she had been elected, said he was not remotely surprised, and looked at her with the expression she had catalogued as number 14 in her internal register of his expressions, the one that meant admiration with a strong current of personal pride, unperformed, entirely genuine. She kissed him in the kitchen in front of Thomas, who made a face, and Frances, who had always approved of her parents' fondness for each other with an unsentimental pragmatism that was entirely her own. In the spring of 1886, Catherine discovered she was pregnant with their third child. She was 34 years old. Ezekiel was 37. Thomas was 6, and Frances was 3. The ranch was thriving. The accounting practice was established and profitable. The house had been expanded twice. She told Ezekiel on a morning in April, sitting on the porch in the early light with coffee, watching the sun come up over the eastern ridge, while Thomas could be heard inside the house attempting to teach Frances a card game she did not have the patience for. He put his arm around her and she leaned into him, and they watched the light move across the valley below the ranch, the land his father had claimed and that they had fought to keep, and that had become, in the years of their shared life, something she could not imagine being separate from. 3, he said. 3, she confirmed. Thomas is going to be insufferable about being the older brother to 2, he said. He barely survived being the older brother to 1. He will adapt, she said. He adapts to everything. He gets that from you. He gets the stubbornness from you. That is fair, Ezekiel said. They sat in the morning quiet together, the way they had sat by fire and lamplight and kitchen table through 7 years of shared life, the two of them, and the particular kind of silence they had always been able to share without filling it unnecessarily. I want you to know something, Ezekiel said. I have been wanting to say it for a while and have not found the occasion. She looked at him. What? He turned to her, and there was the open expression again, the enormous and unguarded one, the one that still caught her whenever it appeared. When you rode up to this fence in October of 1878 and told me you would not be used against me, he said, I did not know what to make of you. I had been working alone for 2 years, and I had decided, not consciously, not in any way I had examined carefully, that working alone was simply what I did. That there was a kind of management in that, a controlled simplicity. And then I complicated it, she said. Then you complicated everything, he said, in the best possible way. In the way that made me understand that the control I thought I had was actually just a very organized form of loneliness, and that I had been mistaking it for sufficiency. She reached up and touched his face. You are not alone, she said. No, he said. I am emphatically not alone. She kissed him there on the porch in the April light, with the valley spread below them and the sound of their children disagreeing peaceably inside the house, and the long Nevada spring beginning in the fields. Their third child arrived in November of 1886, a boy, large and healthy in the family tradition, with Catherine's gray eyes and a disposition that was, from his earliest days, significantly calmer than his siblings, which Miriam said was either the resolution of the family's accumulated intensity or evidence that the child had assessed his situation and decided the most strategic position was patience. They named him William. Thomas Underwood, at 7, conducted a serious evaluation of his new brother over the course of about 2 weeks before pronouncing him acceptable and assigning himself the role of primary guide and instructor, a role he had previously appointed himself to for Frances, and intended to hold in perpetuity with respect to all subsequent siblings. Frances Underwood, at 3 1/2, was entirely unimpressed by William and much more interested in the horse situation, which Ezekiel said was probably healthy. Dustcreek in 1887 was a proper town, with a newspaper, a telegraph line that had been extended from Abilene, 2 doctors, a proper courthouse, and a commercial district that served the surrounding ranching and mining communities with genuine efficiency. It was not a big town. It would probably never be a big town. But it was a good one, built on the particular foundation of people who had refused to let one man's greed determine its limits. Harlow Briggs had served his federal sentence. He had been released in 1890 and had gone to San Francisco as far as anyone in Dustcreek knew. He did not return. He was, in the accounting of the town's life, a finished chapter. The Underwood accounting practice expanded its service territory to include 3 additional counties by 1888, when Catherine took on a second associate and established a formal partnership with a Carson City firm. She was not the largest accounting operation in Nevada. She was the most trusted in the communities she served, which was a distinction she valued more. In the evenings, when the children were in bed and the ranch was settled, she and Ezekiel sat by the fire in the way they had sat in every version of their life together. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes she read and he worked on the ranch books. Sometimes they simply sat. He brought her tea always without being asked in the years of their marriage. It was a small thing. She noticed it every time. She had been a woman who had come west with $42 and no clear picture of what came next. She was now a woman with 3 children and a ranch and a business and a community, and a man who brought her tea in the evenings without being asked. She thought about the distance between those 2 versions of herself sometimes, not with nostalgia for what had been, but with the particular satisfaction of someone who has covered a significant distance on their own terms and arrived somewhere worth arriving at. She thought about the gun at Ezekiel's temple and the way he had looked at her, with forgiveness before he was even dead. She had told him about that eventually in the way of things you carry for a while before you can put them down. He had been quiet for a moment and then he had said, "There was nothing to forgive. I led you there. Briggs used me to get to you. You did not know you were being followed in Abilene," he said. "You could not have known. You made the best decision you had the information to make. I should have told you about the message, about going to the saloon." "Yes," he said, "you should have, and you know that. I do, and you have not done it since." "No." "Then we are resolved," he said. "That is all." It was that simple with him. Not simple in the sense of being easy, but simple in the sense of being real. He did not hoard grievances. He did not manage her with subtle retaliations. When something was resolved, it was resolved. She had never taken that for granted. She intended never to take it for granted. Thomas grew into a young man who was, by 16, better with the ranch accounts than anyone except his mother, and who had a gift for the practical management of land and cattle that was entirely his own. He was not a duplicate of either parent. He was himself, entirely, in the way that children are when they have been given enough room. Frances became a young woman of fierce intellectual energy who announced at 14 that she intended to study law, a declaration that caused precisely nobody who knew her any surprise at all. Ezekiel said he would help her find the right institution when the time came, and Catherine noted the expression on Ezekiel's face when he said it, the number 14 expression, the admiration, and thought that whatever she had built here, whatever they had built, the evidence of it was in the faces of their children. William, the patient one, became interested in medicine, which Dustcreek could certainly use, and which suited his temperament entirely. On the evening of their 10th wedding anniversary, January of 1889, Ezekiel sat down across from Catherine at the kitchen table that had held 7 years of their document work and 10 years of their shared life and said, "I want to tell you something I have not said in exactly the right way." She put down her pen. "Tell me." "I fell in love with you," he said, "on the afternoon you rode up to my fence and told me you would not be used against me. I did not know that is what it was at the time. I told myself it was professional interest, shared objective. I told myself that for approximately 3 weeks, which was the amount of time it took me to accept what was actually happening. She looked at him across the table. The lamp burned between them. Outside, the Nevada winter moved across the basin. I know, she said. He smiled. You knew then, I suspected. You are readable Ezekiel to someone paying attention. Am I the fence tool, she said. You put it down before you invited me in. You always keep your hands occupied when you are working something out. You put it down, which meant you had decided something. He looked at her with the open, enormous expression. You are extraordinary, he said. The same words he had said to her in the first weeks of their acquaintance, carrying now the full weight of everything that had come between. I know, she said again, but softly, and reached across the table. He held her hand in the kitchen of the home they had built together, with the winter outside and the children asleep and the fire going steadily. And it was, Catherine thought, the exact right ending to the story they had written from the moment. A woman with $42 and a borrowed horse had ridden up to a fence in the Nevada autumn and decided that some things were worth fighting for. They sat like that for a long time, her hand in his, the lamp burning, the story complete.